Hey friends, welcome to episode 464 of the My 123 Cents podcast. Both audio and video versions up and running once again this week. And I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen, download, subscribe, follow, like, all of that good stuff. I am truly appreciative of it. Whether you subscribe on YouTube, whether you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app, or leave a review somewhere. It is truly great. It is truly appreciated, and it goes a long way in this journey. So, again, 464 episodes of the My 123 Cents podcast now officially in the books as we record this week's episode. And keeping with the Halloween theme that I set out to do for the month of October, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Even though we're talking about Halloween, that means Christmas is just around the corner. And I want to remind folks to donate to the My 123 Cents Wrestling Figure Drive. It is going on right now as we speak, has been since July. Did a kind of a kickoff Christmas in July style. There is a collection point at Castle Perilous in Carbondale, Illinois. So if you live in Southern Illinois, you can drop off a new wrestling action figure still in the package at Castle Perilous, or you can contact me on social media. Whether you do it through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever it is, I'm on all of those platforms under my name, Kevin Huntsberger, and I would be glad to meet you somewhere, pick up a donation. If you want to Venmo me, it's Kevin-Huntsberger. Pretty easy to do. And last year, folks did it that way. I've already had a couple that have done it this year. And I will go shopping then and make the most, get the most bang for the buck, as they say. And I know that Ollie's in West Frankfort, Illinois, and I know there are others around the country, but they actually have really good wrestling figures. WWE, I don't think they had AEW last year, but last year they had WWE Basics for like $6.50, $7. And they had some of the elites for like, I think it was about $12. So much cheaper than at Walmart or Target. And not to say don't shop at those places, but if you are looking to get something a little cheaper, go to Ollie's. They had also some wrestling games and some other little things that some folks bought and donated as well. So again, I encourage you. The goal is 300, and it's a lofty goal. It's the biggest goal that I've ever set for this. But I'm optimistic, and I really hope that you will work with me to make this happen, even if you just share this information with someone and let them know about it, or someone, a group that's looking to make a difference for someone this Christmas. Send them my way, and I will definitely put those funds and those toys to good use. They will go to the Southern Illinois Toys for Tots program, which helps 5 counties here in Southern Illinois, and will make a difference on Christmas morning. We've talked about Christmas here long enough. Now let's talk about Halloween. Now, last week I did the make me choose between 2 scary wrestlers. And this week, taking on the topic, and I actually had thought about this the other day as I was trying to brainstorm some topics, and something had popped up that made me think about some of the tie-ins. I think it was the Chucky, actually, from back in 1998, and we'll talk about him in just a few more minutes. But there was something else going on in modern wrestling, and Chad had sent me something from WWE from over the weekend that it wasn't tied to this, but it all kind of comes together because, let's face it, wrestling, especially specifically WWE, is a major, major business. And with that comes a lot of sponsorships. And with those sponsorships, then, of course, come responsibilities for fulfilling said sponsorship. And so we get silly matches like a Mountain Dew of Darkness match from the Royal Rumble earlier this year. And I don't have that on the list this year, or this week, but it's those kinds of promotional tie-ins. And that's what we're looking at today, is those Halloween scary movie, scary TV show tie-ins with the world of professional wrestling. And we're not going to just be picking on WWE this week. So there's going to be, and I say picking on, and I'm going to be as nice in my memories and reviews of this as possible. I'm not here to put anyone or anything down, but just sharing some memories, some thoughts. Because I think fans, obviously wrestling has come a long way since when I was a fan in the early 80s versus now, 40 years later, still watching, but not with the same vim and vigor as I watched in the 80s, the 90s, or even, 20 years ago. Life changes and things happen, and you don't, at least I have not made the effort to stay connected and watch on a week to week basis. Now, I still do watch, as I have said before, clips on social media, and I keep up with the storylines. I know what's going on in AEW. I know what's going on in WWE, NXT, Impact to an extent, the NWA somewhat. Um, and that's the bulk of my wrestling, and for many years, it was Stride, with Stride Pro Wrestling, independent wrestling here in Southern Illinois. And I've kind of taken a break from all that as well. And Stride is actually kind of on the shelf, on hiatus, if you will, for the time being. So I'm saying all this to say that, I, as a 50-year-old, am not consuming wrestling the same way I did as a 40-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 20-year-old, or a 10-year-old when I really first got really invested and into wrestling. And the product isn't the same as it was when I was 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 and now at age 50. So there's been an evolution of sorts, and some things are great, some things but it's this evolving thing, and obviously something is going right, because Vince McMahon just recently made what, $9 or $9.5 billion with the future, or with the future Endeavor, with the Endeavor deal. So you know there are people that know what they're doing, and even though it doesn't hit with all of us, and some of these other things that I'll be talking about this week, it's the same thing. It doesn't always hit with certain fan bases, certain demographics of fans, and that's fine too. Wrestling, I think Dusty Rhodes was the first to say it, but Eric Bischoff says it quite frequently on his podcast. Wrestling is like a buffet. Not everything on that buffet is for you, but you may like some of that fried chicken, or you may like a piece of that key lime pie, or those green beans, but you maybe want to avoid the corn on the cob, or whatever the case may be. You get the analogy. And so as I say some of these things, and again, I say that it's not for me per se, it doesn't mean that I don't think it shouldn't be then part of the show or consumed by others. So one of the more recent memories, not the most recent. I'm kind of bouncing around on these. I'm not tackling them in any particular order, but I just jotted a few down and kind of reminiscing. Was back in 2021. It was still kind of that COVID pandemic era of WWE and AEW for that matter. We didn't have crowds. We were doing things. And I'm trying to remember something fuzzy on the memory, and it's only been 2.5 years, but I know that there was WrestleMania that year in 2021 was in front of a crowd, but I think it was sparse, and it was outside. But then in May of 2021, the event that I'm talking about, it was WrestleMania Backlash, and it was done in Thunderdome, and so it was all on the monitors. And I think, if I remember correctly, because they were in Florida for WrestleMania, they were able to have it with the crowd, but I don't remember. It's besides the point. But yeah, WrestleMania Backlash, it was to promote a movie called Army of the Dead, and it was a zombie film. I don't know a whole lot of details about it, and I probably should have done a little more digging. I think Batista was involved in this movie, but when it came down to the match, it was a lumberjack style match, which of course we know other wrestlers in a traditional lumberjack match surround the ring and make sure that neither of the competitors get out, and they are forced back into the ring. And I think this was still at a time when Miz and Damian Priest were kind of going back and forth, because I believe this was on the follow-up of the WrestleMania that Bad Bunny was at, that Bad Bunny and Damian Priest wrestled John Morrison and The Miz. I think I have my timeline right. If I don't, correct me, please, in the comments. But so there was a story there. We knew that Damian Priest and The Miz were going back and forth. So there was a story behind it. And so at least that helps make this a little more palatable. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. But then I remember the two competitors, Miz and Priest, end up outside the ring, and they both end up fighting the zombies because it's all these zombies, and it was hokey, it was silly, it was stupid. Let's face it. I think people crapped all over it on social media. Obviously, uh, Miz ends up losing the match, and then I believe he and Morrison end up getting eaten by the zombies at the end of the day too. So the heel gets his comeuppance against the zombies, and I guess in this case the zombies were supposed to be baby faces. I don't know, but it was one of those things. Again, it's that cross promotion for a movie. Uh, when they do little things like this throughout the greater course of a 52-week schedule each year, it's minuscule, but these kind of hokey moments leave big marks on us, and big impressions and memories for us. And so the other one that I'm going to talk about is the most recent one that I can think of, at least, and that was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre death match that aired on AEW Dynamite. This was just back in August, and this was to promote the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game. So it wasn't a movie, but it was a video game based, of course, on a movie, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 50 years ago. I think it was 73 when Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out. And that movie, it was the year I was born, but I watched it later, obviously, in life. And that movie just creeped me out like no other movie. And so I think it's loosely based on true events. I think, again, if I'm wrong on that, grill me in the comments. But I feel like this particular one, and I'm not, people, the AEW fan base is going to think I'm picking on it because it's an AEW thing. I didn't understand why they did this with Jeff Jarrett and Jeff Hardy. I didn't feel like there was a story there, unlike with Miz and Damian Priest. If you want to do the cross promotional thing, I get that. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think if it becomes an entire show that is, all of these gimmicks are based on a movie or a video game, then maybe it gets a little cumbersome and a little too much and a little overload. But these, again, one match here and there, it doesn't bother me. Now, this was a hardcore match. There was barbed wire and blood and chainsaws. Obviously, Leatherface didn't really use the chainsaw on anyone, but Jeff Jarrett bled like a stuck pig, and that to me was the turnoff. I'm not into those hardcore style matches, and Tyler Hatton and I talked about this a few weeks ago. There are companies around here, there are wrestlers around, Southern Illinois, that do a lot with their career, based on this violence, this hardcore, the light tubes and the thumbtacks and ladders and razor blades and pizza cutters and all that. I've never been into that style, and it's not for me. But again, I'm not going to criticize and say that it shouldn't be done and it shouldn't air on shows and whatnot, as long as the competitors are being safe. And I think in the AEW realm, they certainly were being as safe as possible, with the amount of blood loss, and there are medical professionals that are on hand and able to assist and help. But again, it's that hokiness. It's the Leatherface character coming out, and a little bit later here on the show, I'm going to talk about some of those movie monsters that made the transition into the wrestling world as well. And Leatherface was one of them. Corporal Kirshner, or the artist formerly known as Corporal Kirshner, wrestled as Leatherface in Japan for years. And the way I understand it, I never saw any of those matches, but the way I understand it, the gimmick was quite over. And so was he. And I don't know. I think there was a transition somewhere along the way that there was another Leatherface or a super Leatherface. I don't know all the particulars on that, but going back to this AEW thing, it's also my understanding that this sponsorship, or whatever the video game people paid, that money was donated to the victims of the Hawaiian wildfires. So it was done in kind, and I guess at the end of the day it was a wash. But my biggest criticism of it was, what was the story, and what was the point of the belt? Are they going to make this a yearly thing? Is this going to be something that Jeff Jarrett's going to come back out and defend sometime, or was it just part of the, uh, you know, the moment of the night? Because, like I said, this was in August, and I don't think, and correct me again if I'm wrong, that outside of the Conrad podcast, I don't know that this match or the championship or that belt or any of that has been talked about since. Again, I could be wrong on that because I don't watch those programs at length. So I would have maybe put two other people in there, or two people that had a story going on, or to me, it would have just made more sense. You had the fearless Jeff Jarrett, or I'm sorry, Jeff Hardy in there, who was going to take those big spots and those big bumps and be pretty fearless in doing it. And then Jeff Jarrett, who, has kind of had a resurgence. I don't know if third act maybe at this point, but he's entertaining, and I enjoy Jeff Jarrett. So again, nothing against the competitors, nothing against the concept or the idea, other than I wish maybe it was more storyline driven, and maybe it involved two wrestlers that are more traditionally associated with that style of wrestling. John Moxley comes to mind for obvious reasons, and I'm sure there was reasoning behind it. I never really heard or understood what it was, but I'm sure to each his own. And that's kind of my 1, 2, 3 cents on that Texas Chainsaw hardcore match. Finally, can't move forward without talking about these movie tie-ins and wrestling. Without going back 25 years ago next week, actually. It's The Bride of Chucky. It's a sequel to the Child's Play movies that came out in the late 80s. I'm sure if you're listening or watching this, you know who Chucky is and Child's Play and all that, to the doll that comes to life and terrorizes people, commits heinous crimes and acts against people. And believe it or not, I've never seen any of the Child's Play movies. I've seen bits and pieces again of them, but never sat down and watched. Again, the horror genre is just one that I am not fully into. Now, when I was a kid, preteen and teenager, I loved the Friday the 13th franchise. So I did watch the Friday the 13th movies. And then as an adult, I got into Scream. Up until, I think Scream 3 was the last one I saw. But I'm not really into those other horror films, Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Again, saw it, but left a bad memory. So just was never into those films. So again, nothing against them. And I don't, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you shouldn't watch them or that they should be banned by any means. But in 1998, Chucky was on and was promoting a TV show. I think it was it was to promote the, not the TV show. I'm looking at my notes and I've got two different Chucky experiences written down. So we'll get to the other one here in a minute. But in 1998, it was promoting the Bride of Chucky film. And I think the seeds were planted early on with the laughter coming through during a Rick Steiner promo. And then of course there's the big interruption. Chucky's on the wall. Mean Gene is in the ring interviewing Rick Steiner, and it is awesomely bad. The back and forth, and I feel like it was obviously a pre-tape on the dummy's part, the dummy being Chucky, versus then Rick Steiner, and the reactions and things I didn't feel like worked as probably they had intended them to work, but it was what it was. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't horrific or the worst thing out there, but it was, again, one of those silly tie-ins. And, whether it paid off anything, probably not. Did any more people go and watch that movie or any of these movies or buy these video games because they were a part of a wrestling show? Who's to say? And I'm sure someone maybe is tracking that and would know better or have an idea. But to me, it's more of that fun, and it's something different, and it's adding a little to it. The Chucky thing, it adds to the nostalgia because it has been 25 years, and it must have worked in some sense, because 24 years later, in 2022, last year at this time, on NXT, we see Chucky coming out and doing things and terrorizing some of the superstars of NXT to promote the Chucky series that was on Sci-Fi. I don't know if it's still on. I don't know how it ever did. Someone that may be in the know, let us know if you watched it, if you changed your opinion or your thoughts on any of these things, these uh, mainstream ideas. Did any of these moments change your perception and make you want to watch or play the games like we just talked about? Now, of course, those were some of the famous, the actual characters coming through and making cameos, if you will, or appearances. But through the years, there have been other movie inspired wrestlers who were inspired by characters in movies. And I don't know, I guess there does become a fine line with trademarks and copyrights and all of that. But uh, I wrote down a few of them that came to my mind that I remembered from back in the day. Mostly, again, this is nostalgia because I don't feel like these gimmicks work year round. It was interesting that they did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre match in August. But again, I think it was more to promote the launch of this video game, and they were just dropping it when they dropped it. This time of year, this month, it probably maybe would have worked better or made a little more sense. But again, I'm not being overly critical. It's the same with the Army of the Dead. That was in May. It could have very easily, but again, it's correlating with the movie drops and whatnot. So you kind of got to do what you're going to do with it. But these gimmicks that come through outside of the Halloween season. We look back in December of '95 when Santa Claus, who ended up becoming Balls Mahoney, appeared on WWF programming and was there for a couple of weeks. Behind me, you see the Gobbledygooker. That was a seasonal gimmick. The Christmas creature from USWA. Outside of the season that they're kind of being promoted for, they don't really typically have a long shelf life, or seemingly they don't. And some of these maybe aren't necessarily Halloween related, but they do put off a Halloween vibe. And that, for example, Lord Humongous, who was Sid Vicious under a hockey mask, and the getup was pretty amazing. But that's based on the Humongous character from the movie Mad Max back in the 1980s. So again, check that out and see what that was looking like. But we talked about the Army of the Dead and the zombies. Well, back in 2006-ish, I think, maybe 2007, there was a guy called the Zombie who was part of ECW when it was playing on Sci-Fi. And I don't know if this was completely tied in, but there was also talk of a movie called Pro Wrestlers versus Zombies. And I think Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Roddy Piper are two of the wrestlers who are in this. Chad, if you're listening, we need to watch this and do a movie mania. And maybe we do that in the next week or two and have it on the podcast before the end of the Halloween season and all these Halloween post or podcast. Waylon Mercy, of course, Dan Spivey played him in the mid 90s, was a character based off of Max Candy from the movie Cape Fear. Again, a movie I never saw, but I don't think the longevity was there. I think there were other issues going on with Dan Spivey's health that kind of prevented that. We talked about Leatherface earlier with Corporal Kirshner, and I think there may have been another couple of incarnations of that Leatherface character. Nightmare Freddy, I remember reading about Nightmare Freddy, never saw him, but read about him in the aftermags. He was down there in Memphis and, wrestling. And I think I did, I don't know if I did a podcast or a blog on it. If I didn't do a podcast, I'll do some research on it, on those early casket match days. And I think that one of the first casket matches was either in Texas or in Memphis. So I'm going to have to dust off that research and look at that again. But some of those Memphis characters were pretty much out there. And then another one based on Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th series was Jason the Terrible, and he wrestled in Calgary. And I believe in Stampede area, and I believe he and Owen Hart had a run and maybe even been tag team champions. But again, another big menacing figure. Obviously, guys like Kane, who were those, there were monsters that came about through wrestling that worked over time and weren't necessarily based off of a horror film, but then could have been their own horror movies. And we talked about those last week with the scariest wrestlers, whether it was Kane or Bray Wyatt, The Fiend, um, Abdullah the Butcher, the Boogeyman, all of those characters kind of came about as well. And Kane, of course, having his own movie when he did See No Evil, and I think maybe even a couple of incarnations of that movie. So I want to hear from you though, and want to know more about what some characters were that were involved in professional wrestling from the main stage, what movies or TV shows or video games were incorporated. And again, I just went off the ones that came to the top of my head that I remembered that were Halloween themed. Now I know obviously we could talk all day about some of these others like RoboCop and Sting from back in 1990. And there are other, tie-ins with No Holds Barred, for example. I remember all of the other movie tie-ins, but there are specific scary movies that go into this as well. And that's what we were focusing on for this week's podcast. Next week, it'll be more Halloween talk. I don't know exactly who or what will be joining me on the podcast, what the topic will be, but I can promise you it will be something worth tuning in for. Again, friends, thank you so much for being a part of the My 123 Cents experience. Leave a review. Head over to prowrestlingtees.com/my123cents and pick up some My 123 Cents swag. You can also shop at thighhuggers.com and use promo code my123cents, and you save on your orders. There are Halloween designs there. There's also Thanksgiving and Christmas and just any kind. If you're working out, if you're a wrestler yourself, these are great athletic shorts for running, for working out in, for lounging around by the pool, whatever the case may be. And they come in a variety of sizes as well. Also over at collarandelbowbrand.com, there is a promo code of my123cents where you can save 10% on your orders there as well. And it all goes to support the brand and hopefully raising some awareness about the My 123 Cents toy drive again that is coming up as underway as we speak, but distribution will be happening that second week in December. Friends, thank you again so much for listening and or watching, leaving that review. Have a great week, and we will talk again soon.